Hello again. Welcome to episode 2 of the Director's Box podcast. Coming with you with Craig, as always. And we are joined this week by a very, very special guest. Craig, would you like to introduce our guest as you know her so much better than myself?
Yeah, sure. Delighted to have Rhian Cleverly join us from Lewes Football Club. Rhian is the club captain there. Has been a stalwart for many seasons and is an integral part of what Lewes Football Club is about. But probably best if I ask Rhian to introduce herself and give us some background on her time, both domestically and of course as a former Welsh international as well, about her background in the game.
Yeah, hi both Kevin and Craig, and obviously all the listeners. Real pleasure to be on the call. But yeah, where do I start? I think our paths have crossed obviously at Lewes, Craig, but also it's a small football world and back in Wales too. So I grew up in a small town called Griffithstown. There was no girls teams at the time, but the more my mum said no, the more I wanted to play football. Joined a local team. And then from there, from 16, found a girls' team in Abergavenny, moved to Bristol when I wanted to take football a bit more seriously, which was Bristol Academy at the time, now Bristol City. And that's when I started really taking football more seriously and managed to play in the Welsh age groups, 16s, 17s, 19s, and managed to get one single senior cap up in Scotland, but managed to captain all the youth age groups too and have some real fond memories travelling around the world during that time with the likes of, I think you spoke before, Oshan Roberts, Carl Darlington, James Rowbury, David Adams. So yeah, our paths definitely linked there. But from there, women's football, I don't know how much our listeners know, but has only grown really in the last 5 to 10 years. So I had to make the move across the pond. I had a scholarship in New York University to study and also play. Spent 4 years there. And then from that point, I managed to achieve a dream, which I didn't know I'd be capable of. There was no professional women's football at the time, but I got a contract in France to play for Le Hack in Le Havre, Normandy. Had the best year of my life there, playing the beautiful game and the highs and lows of that. 2 days after the season ended, I was called into my coach's office and he said au revoir. So I got released. It was quite heartbreaking at the time. But again, the highs and lows of football. And then from there, came back, thought I needed to come closer to home, maybe start taking adult life a little bit seriously. And I went back to university to study in sports psychology at Chichester. And then from there, I found myself at a little small town in Lewes. And little did I know, there's always a silver lining, but found what I think is one of the best football clubs in the world in Lewes Football Club. And I've been there ever since, 5 years, captain, Hall of Fame, also some tough times going through COVID and playing football through a global pandemic, which was quite weird, and also double hip surgery, which when Craig was my coach too. So yeah, plenty of highs and lows, and that's just a brief overview, but just so passionate about football, probably why I find myself on this podcast today talking for the directors out there.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. We really appreciate you giving up some time. What we'll do on this episode of the podcast, then, we're going to park the men's game for this week. As we alluded to last week, we're waiting for the Everton points deduction to be revealed. It still hasn't been. There's no point in touching on the men's game again. There was no real significant impact in the Football League. So we'll park that until next week. And we're going to have a real full focus on the women's game this week. In particular, the WSL. We'll touch on the Women's Championship. We'll look at the international success of the Lionesses and everything else. And we might try and touch on 1 or 2 issues if we can before the end of the podcast. Aside with that, it's probably the best week to have done this, really, Rhian, because obviously Arsenal versus Manchester United on Saturday just gone. They broke an attendance record for a women's league football in this country. Over 60,000 people attended that match at the Emirates Stadium. Friday night, there was a real title challenge, wasn't there, between Chelsea, obviously favourites, probably still favourites to win the title, against Manchester City. Emma Hayes' last sort of season at Chelsea. So it's another big storyline. Manchester City probably caused maybe a bit of an upset there, going to Chelsea and winning that game. So it was a real big weekend in the Women's Super League, not just for that attendance, but literally the top 4 teams played against each other. How did you see it?
Yeah, definitely. It was quite nice on Friday night just to sit down, have my dinner, and watching women's football on the BBC, which is still, I have to pinch myself to see that because that wasn't happening 10 years ago. But yeah, it was such an entertaining game too. I'm not sure if any of the listeners managed to watch it, but Man City dominated well in the first half. They pressed Chelsea, which not many teams have the courage and bravery to do. A young Jess Park has got into the team recently because Jill Rhodes, who's an international, she's recently done her ACL. So this youngster, she's just got into the Lionesses squad. Jess really did well, nipped the ball, and they caught Chelsea on the break and managed to get a goal to go 1-0 up. And yeah, it was great. Second half, Chelsea came all out. Emma Hayes must have given them a talking to at half time, but they just couldn't find a way through. Man City really, really defended well. I think they're level on points now, level on goal difference as well. So it's going to be tight going into the final few months of the season. And yeah, it's just all exciting. And I think that's only going to grow support for the women's game.
Chelsea ahead of Man City by just 5 goals scored in the league. It's shaping up to be a really exciting finish. It was always going to be, wasn't it, Craig, with this being Emma Hayes' last season at Chelsea before she joined you across the pond as the coach of the American national side. And do you see Chelsea being strong enough to hold on this sort of powerful Manchester City side that are coming at them? Just 8 goals conceded in 14 games in the Women's Super League this season for Manchester City. They say, well, there's an American adage, isn't there, that defenses win championships. And if that's the case, Man City might be tough to stop.
Yeah, I think Gareth Taylor's done a great job at Manchester City. And again, someone I know who's come through the Welsh coach education program, which we mentioned in the last podcast. Yeah, I think Man City obviously an entity to be reckoned with, and which was proven obviously in Friday night's game as Rhian has mentioned. But I'm sure with all Emma Hayes' experience and knowledge that they'll be reflecting on this one, and they should be making the utmost preparations to ensure that there's no repeat of this from now to the end of the season, I'm sure. So I still think Chelsea are favourites to win it, in my opinion. And but I'm eagerly watching and seeing how close they can be run by the teams around them.
Is that how you see it, Rhian? Would you have Chelsea's favourites still? Or could Arsenal come on the sort of blind side after that result at the weekend?
Yeah, I think Arsenal, I'm biased. I'm an Arsenal men's and women's supporter, so I'm always going to be rooting for them. But I don't think you can look past Chelsea at the moment, especially with Emma Hayes' last season. I think they're going to push even harder if there was any extra motivation needed. I think Arsenal have now lost 3 games. And previously, if you've lost more than 2, because there's so limited number of games in the WSL, which is something that maybe we can talk about in a second, you can't afford to lose 3 games in the WSL. It's getting tighter. But yeah, despite a great result against United, I think you can't look past Chelsea at the moment. They've got such squad depth. People like Millie Bright, who have been out injured for a few months, and they still have packed international squads. So yeah, they're the favourites for me, and it's gonna be exciting. But I think they'll be able to pick it towards the end.
Yeah, I am looking forward to the end of this season. Obviously, Arsenal got a really strong strike force, haven't they, with Alicia Russo obviously leaving Man United to go to Arsenal at the start of the season. So if goals are to come for them, they certainly got the firepower to deliver the goods on that. You spoke actually, Rhian, about watching the game on BBC Two on Friday night, and I guess that's the legacy of the international success of the women's game in recent times, particularly with the Lionesses. There's 2 huge broadcast deals for the WSL. Both BBC show a game pretty much most weeks these days, and Sky Sports have started showing it extensively this season. Is that beginning to filter all the way through, or is that just something that, much like in the men's game, the Premier League has got a monopoly on sort of the money that's coming through the success of, well, in the men's game, it's the Premier League. Obviously, in the women's game, it's the Lionesses.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case. And you find that it's kind of like an Instagram versus reality saying at the moment, where in the WSL and the top international players are really reaping the awards of the success of the Lionesses, and rightly so. But then, obviously, myself in the Championship at the moment, we can't even stream our games live. They have a viewing called the FA Player, which you can get online. But that's only 1 live game a weekend normally. So there's weekends where they do promote a little bit more, like Women's Football Weekend. They try and get a few more on. FA Cup and the BBC have done a little bit more. Our recent game last year was live on the BBC. We reached the quarterfinals. We played Man United. I had the privilege of marking Alicia Russo myself, which was no easy task, and I can assure you of that. But yeah, unfortunately, it's just the top teams at the moment in the top league that is getting all the viewing. But it's quality, and hopefully that trickles through. And we hope that it won't be the same potential issues that the men's game are facing. The women's game, as it's growing, we want it to be football for all. So it is just the Premier League that's being shown. But we know that football, if you support women's football, you support men's football, you support League One. Like, if you love football, you love football. It doesn't matter who's playing. You're passionate about it. So I think the more that can be streamed, the even better to grow the women's game.
I would agree with that, and I have a particular interest in sort of women's football because I have two nieces, 8 and 5, and so they're only just getting into football themselves, and it's not very easy to get them tickets to watch Luton with me, particularly now that Luton are in the Premier League. They sell out every week. It's quite expensive if they don't enjoy it and things like that. So things like the Lionesses, when the Euros was on, when the World Cup was on last year, they would sit in front of the television, they would watch it. They know the football. In fact, I would probably wager that my eldest niece will know more women's footballers than men's footballers right now if you quizzed her on it. And that can only be a good thing, Craig. We need to keep on promoting the whole of the women's game as a whole, obviously through the Lionesses, who are the success story of it right now, but creating more success stories from 1 to 12 in the Women's Super League. And then from the next band below those, I think of my sort of, obviously, I'm a huge Luton fan. Luton have a women's team who are only in a regional league, but they, as Rhian just mentioned, they recently played Brighton in the FA Cup, and they were on the FA Player, and it was a huge deal. Journalists everywhere, and the one thing I sort of recommended to everyone involved, and I know the father of one of the Luton women's players, I just said any publicity that you can get this team around this game, just take it, because it's just great for the women's game as a whole, and I think that message needs to be sort of carried across the whole game. Really, we need to publicize. There's so much good about women's football right now, but everyone needs to hear about it rather than sort of keeping it behind a closed shop, worthy just to be on Sky Sports, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the success of the Lionesses, obviously winning the Euros and then getting to the World Cup final, has been a huge impact on the growth of the game, not only in England but I think probably across the UK. I think it's been evidence that the women and girls game has grown by 50%, I think, in the last 7 years, which obviously is indicative of, the effect that professionalism has had, with the WSL particularly, and obviously with the success at international levels, across, the teams in the UK, not just the Lionesses, but, Wales, Scotland, and the 2 Irish teams as well. I'm sure if I had 2 nieces, I've got a niece, an 18-year-old niece, who has played football. But I'm sure if I had younger females, in my family, then I'm sure they'd be taking an avid interest as well. I also think as well, because of this, because of the success of the Lionesses and obviously the high-profile exposure or more exposure of certain players, I think it's just nothing more than an inspiration to young females, watching the game, and hopefully more will take up the game, either in a playing capacity or in an administrative capacity. Yeah, and I welcome the growth of the game across the piece at all levels, and I think it's I think women's football is unjustifiably being kept behind the men's game, but I think this exposure now really allows it to be brought to the forefront and for it to flourish and realize its potential.
So with that in mind, Rhian, how important is it that the Women's Super League go to these men's grounds and play their games? We had that game at the Emirates Stadium at the weekend, but that's not always the case, is it? For example, Chelsea used Kingstonian's ground as their home ground, previously used Staines's ground as well, I think, as their home ground, also AFC Wimbledon's. But we're not yet in that position where the women's game is in the men's stadiums enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a tough one, because do you want to go to the stadium, big stadiums, and then not sell them out and have a reduced atmosphere? So I think we need to be careful, and we need to be slow in the way that we progress. But I think we can push for more every day. So, for example, at Lewes, we're known as a quality FC, not only for our equal budgets, but we play at the same stadium. Every week we have the same kit with same decisions, same opportunities. This is not always the case in football, but we need to push and show that this can be done. So I think the Emirates selling out is just amazing, and this wouldn't even be a dream like 5-10 years ago. But I think the priority is to make sure it's sustainable. So for me, things like when I was growing up, the only role models that I had on TV were the Soccerettes on Soccer AM, or someone like Sue Barker on The Question of Sport. That's not the case nowadays. Girls can watch females in manager roles, in player roles, as referees, even in the men's game. And I think the more we see this, the more it's going to build teamwork and communication and confidence and leadership skills in girls. And it won't be, I was the only girl in school to play football, or the only girl in the team to play football. Like, and I've learned and I've had so many experiences from playing football. But football was banned in the UK for 50 years. So when the men went off to play, when the men went off to the war, the women took up these sports, and football was one of them. And stadiums were packed then. So I think educating people that this was the case too, that the only reason why women are in a position where they're having to grow the game now is because the FA actually banned women's football for 50 years in this country. So it can be done, and the more we push it and the more we push for equality, the more these experiences and opportunities are going to be for women. And I think it will only grow the game together. We're not taking away from the men to give to the women, but it's such a powerful sport, and it should be for all.
Yeah, particularly in light, as I just said, Craig, it's hard to get tickets to the men's game. So if you can't get tickets to the men's game, then go along to a women's game. It's the same sport. Most of the clubs are the same clubs. You know, you're supporting Arsenal or Chelsea or Man United or Man City or you know, even Luton. If you go to a Luton game, just because you can't get a ticket to a men's game doesn't mean, you know, that you can't go and watch football. Go and watch these women. They are fantastic, particularly at the top levels, as we've just mentioned. And you mentioned sort of role models. Obviously, Mary Earps is probably the big one right now, isn't she? After she recently won Sports Personality of the Year and had that sort of fracas with Nike about getting her shirt sold, and quite rightly come out on the right side of that. So yeah, the best way to promote the women's game is for more eyes to be watching it in the stadiums, really. So if you can't, you know, if you've got your men's team or they're playing away that weekend, go and watch your women's team at home, and you'll really enjoy the experience, because I think that is the difference, isn't it? It's more, a men's attendance is more hostile than a women's attendance. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say so. Obviously, my experience as head coach at Lewes was one which I thoroughly enjoyed. Obviously, I worked in the men's game for many years, in the male game particularly, and obviously coached in the English Football League as well. But I think you're right. I think it is less hostile, which makes for a kinder environment for families, particularly, and quite often at Lewes we would see families attend, and I'm sure Rhian would agree with that. So it's great to see mum, dad, sons and daughters attend the games and get to meet the players, up close and personal after the matches. And I know Rhian probably spent hours of her time over the seasons signing autographs and talking to young fans immediately after the final whistle. So it's that personal connect as well. So well as it being a different environment, there's also, I think, you get the personal connect with players and coaches as well. And as I said, my experience at Lewes was nothing but positive, really, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time there at a great football club with great people.
Do you see that as your duty, Rhian, to promote the game by signing autographs, by posing for selfies and things like that? It seems simple. You don't get it in the men's game, not very often, certainly nowhere near at the top level. I can speak from experience because Luton played Man United on Sunday. There was a queue of people wanting Man United players' autographs, and they just came out straight on the bus, kind of ignored most of them. And I understand it. Obviously they've got millions and millions of followers and things like that. But do you see it as your sort of duty to do that, to just please one person? If you just please one person, it's one person who goes home happy.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. And again, as the women's game is growing, these are maybe the not issues. I don't want to say issues, but situations that we're facing as players. That is it going to go like it is in the men's game, where you don't have the time and the resources to keep every fan happy, and this is a problem that's coming up at the moment. So that expectation for women's players to keep everyone happy. So when we had Man United at the Dripping Pan last season, we sold out. We had to increase our capacity. Quite a lot of the lionesses, so Mary Earps, Alicia Russo, Ella Toon at the time, had to have bodyguards. we had to increase our security because mums and daughters actually try and break into the locker room to get to these players, which would never be an issue in the men's game. It's just they don't get, as you said, they don't even get close to the players. But I think for me, I didn't realise my role as a role model until I came to Lewes FC. There was a picture that our volunteer photographer took, and it was a little girl looking up to me, and she wanted an autograph. And the little girl looked like me as a 9, 10-year-old, and I just realised in that moment that I do have a position. And I think female players, especially this generation, that have probably seen both sides, it being a very unprofessional game, and now reaping the awards of the professional game, are using our platform for better things. So you had Lotte Wubben-Moy, who was one of the lionesses at Arsenal, and she didn't play a minute in the Euros, but she wrote an open letter to the government and had the backing of her team in order to get PE in schools. So you also have, as you said, Mary Earps advocating against Nike to increase goalkeeper shirts, which not only help the female game but also the male game. And then myself and my teammates, when we played Man United, we wrote an open letter to Karen Carney, who was doing an independent review of women's football at the time, in order to increase the FA prize money for the women's game. So I think I might be a bit wrong with these figures, but we earned £51,000 for getting to the quarterfinals of the FA Cup, where if we were males, we would have earned £250,000. And again, we were live on the BBC at the time, and if we were males, we would have earned £250,000 just for showing that TV live stream. But we actually lost money because we had to get rid of some of our sponsorships to have the game live. So it just shows that there's still so much inequality in the game, and we're already fighting against. We have a lot of girls who still work full time and play professionally. So it's really hard, but I think we have to use our platform, and we have to keep pushing for more opportunities and more money in the women's game in order for it to be a success.
Yeah, I agree with everything Rhian has said there, really. And also from a coach's perspective, when I was, taking over the club, and from contractual perspective, looking at players' contracts, and without going into detail, they're class of professional footballers, and they throw themselves into that life, and they dedicate themselves, through fitness training and diet and recovery and everything else that goes with it. They train 5-6 days a week. They're in the morning for team meetings, for prehab. Then they'll go through the warm up. Then we'll run the coaching session for an hour and a half, 2 hours. Then we'll do maybe some video analysis or some individual work. So it is a full-time occupation, and perhaps unless you're in the top few clubs in the country, because of the revenue or the lack of revenue that's realized by the women's game at the moment, players do have to have secondary occupations. So, I can't imagine investing all that time as a player and then having to go and work, in the evenings, doing whatever they did to supplement their salary. So there's definitely a huge gap there, which hopefully with the growth of the game and greater, broadcasting revenue, especially with, the new organising body which is coming into place now, which will oversee the WSL and the FA Women's Championship, a bit like the FA Premier League has done in the men's game. Hopefully that will generate more income, and hopefully that will then see it manifest itself into greater salary structure for the players in the game.
Yeah, I think that's important, isn't it? We need to keep growing the game, but at the same time, there needs to be an equality to it, and the margins of finance that Rhian just mentioned there for the same sport in the same competition is kind of far too great. Before we sort of touch on your division in particular, Rhian, because we haven't got you on just to talk about the top flight, it is International Weekend this weekend, and the Lionesses have got a couple of games, which again are both live on ITV in the UK, so they're on terrestrial TV. So I know my nieces are looking forward to watching those, particularly as Luton don't have a game this weekend, so we can all sit down and watch it as a family. They play Austria on Friday night, Italy on Tuesday. Unfortunately, there's no Olympics for the Lionesses, or Team GB as it would be, for them to focus on, but it's the start of another cycle towards the Euros, and obviously defending the crown in a couple of years' time. So these will be two important games and good games to watch.
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, with the domestic leagues and the increase in participation and people watching that, but I think that's just as we spoke about, due to the international success. And I think it's important not to forget the Scotland, Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and Wales play a part in that too. So only recently with the Euros, Northern Ireland qualified for the first time, and they're still a very small team, but they're just pushing well above their weight. Wales are getting closer and closer every time, every campaign to qualify. Scotland have got some world class players there with the likes of Caroline Weir out in Madrid, Erin Cuthbert playing at Chelsea. I'm biased, but one of my best friends, Martha Thomas, that was at United and now at Spurs, who's absolutely killing the game there. And then Republic of Ireland that qualified for the World Cup and have such a strong squad too. And sometimes I think are forgotten about, but yeah, sometimes those smaller countries are still pushing their weight, and I think it's just great that those are being streamed live too. And I said, the young girls like your nieces can watch that, and just for me, I can watch it too, and it's great to see girls that I'm competing with on the weekend then going to represent their country. So we've got a number in the championship too, as well as the WSL. That we have Atlanta Primus, who's at Southampton, that played in the World Cup with Jamaica. We've got a girl on our team, Cara Hamilton, that is going away with Northern Ireland. We dropped her at Leicester this weekend on the way home. So the championship and the WSL are filled with international quality players, but also really good people that use their platform to grow the women's game. So yeah, watch it, get to know women's football, and I promise you won't be disappointed.
Certainly echo that. So let's sort of move down to the second tier, and I'll come to you first, Craig, because the structure of the women's game at the moment, only one team gets promoted out of the championship into the WSL. If you look at the men's game, and admittedly there are more teams in the men's division, but if you look at the men's game, there's 3 up from the championship to the Premier League, 2 automatically, 1 via the playoffs. Would you like to see, first of all, more promotion places from the championship into WSL, or maybe 1 automatic and a playoff to keep the kind of season sort of alive for more teams?
Well, I think what I'd like to see, Kevin, I'd like to see more teams in the divisions. To be honest with you, as you know, there's 12 teams in the FA Women's Championship, and my experience as a coach, as a team manager with Lewes, was that you might go 2, 3, sometimes even 4 weeks between games because there's only 12 teams in the league, obviously. So 22 games spread over the course of a full season. So we still play, from sort of August through to May. You have the League Cup competition. Of course, you have the FA Cup, which Rhian has already alluded to, and their great success recently against getting to the quarterfinal and only losing to Manchester United. But I think with this new consortium coming in now, NewCo, and overseeing the governance of the Women's Super League and the FA Women's Championship, I think this could be a fantastic opportunity for them to revisit the structure of the leagues and look at ideally increasing the numbers of teams within those leagues. And I think because of that, there would be more games on a more regular basis, which would then hopefully attract a more constant fan base. Because obviously, if you're only watching a team once every 3 weeks to a month, then you could quite easily miss a game simply because you're not going as regularly as you might to a men's game. Also, as a coach and as players, I think you can get a loss of momentum or perhaps a lack of consistency from one game to the next because you've got those breaks. And of course, we just alluded to the international breaks. So you've got to put the international breaks in as well. So given that, it's very difficult for players to get into momentum and consistency, and it's certainly difficult for coaches as well, because obviously you're planning, you're preparing, you play a game, then you might not play again then for 3 weeks. So you have to maintain obviously fitness levels and performance levels within trainings. And similarly, when the games do come, you then find yourself playing 3 games in a week. You play on a Sunday, you'll play the league game, you play the midweek League Cup game, you play the next league game the following Sunday, and then you have a break for 3 weeks. So I think that the whole structure and organisation and timetabling of the women's game needs a drastic review, in my opinion, as a coach. And I'm sure I'm not the only coach in the Championship or indeed the WSL to have that opinion. I also know that there are teams in the tiers below, in the national leagues below, North and South, who have, like Luton, who have professional clubs and their women's team, which have grown obviously through the success again of international football and the WSL. So those teams are going to be competitive, and I'm sure they wouldn't be out of place. The top team certainly in those leagues in the Women's Championship as they come through the system, which I think Southampton have already proven. They got promoted recently and they've come through and they're in the top 3 at the moment in the Women's Championship. But I think there's a fantastic opportunity, as I said, to grow the game and to grow the leagues, particularly in the WSL and in the Championship. And the point you made about playoffs, I think you've only got to look at, the men's leagues, and there's ridiculous situations where teams as low as 14th can potentially are still in even at this stage of the season, and even lower 16th perhaps, are still in contention for playoff places. So that only can be good for the game, and where you foster that interest right the way through to the last few weeks of the season, and you don't have sort of games which don't have anything to play for perhaps towards the end of the season, dead rubbers as it were. So yeah, I think playoffs is it could be a fantastic improvement on the game and add to the excitement towards the end of the season. Plus, I think taking 2 teams up from the Championship, one maybe via automatic and one via playoff situation, whereby teams 2, 3, 4, and 5, 5th place, they could be involved in that, and that would again would give something for those mid-table teams to really aim for towards the end of the season. Not that you should have an incentive of playoffs to play through to the end of the season, but I just think it would lend itself particularly well to the women's tables.
And it would also create sort of a huge narrative as well, wouldn't it, Rhian? I think in the men's game, I mean, I've lucky enough supporting Luton that Luton were in the playoffs for the last 2 seasons in the Championship. And the magnitude around those 2 semi-finals, I mean, you've obviously gone through the whole season, and now your season comes down to sort of a cup tie, if you will. But the rewards, everyone knows what the rewards are. Those kind of games, when you actually watch them, you knew that there was so much more on them, as opposed to sort of the 2 weeks before when it was just a league game against the same team. There was so much more on them. It would just bring that extra sort of narrative that the women's game could use to sell itself even further, couldn't it? That last place in the WSL is going to come down to these 4 teams, and they're going to go hell for leather at it and deliver great football. And that ultimately, the best way of promoting anything is to deliver a great product. And playoffs generally do, unless you're a team involved in them where they're nervy as anything, they generally do deliver a great product.
Yeah, definitely. I think we need to start looking at things like that and be creative in how we can grow the women's game. And I think this is the no-brainer of a way to look at it, because there's things that we don't want to take from men's football, and maybe the hostility and sometimes the abuse, and that'll come as the women's game grows. But I think the playoffs is one thing that could really be exciting and really bring more attention to the women's game in a positive way. So yeah, I'm all for it, and I think maybe questions have been raised previously on not increasing the amount get promoted or the amount getting relegated just because of the gap between some of the teams in the WSL, the Championship, and the National League below. But as Craig is saying, even the teams in the National League below, and they're doing 2 promotions this year from the Northern and the Southern Division rather than just one that previously has had a playoff, which has been quite harsh. If you've gone all through the season, you've won your league, and then you have to play a playoff game. So yeah, it's been quite harsh. Previously this year, it's 2 relegated from the Championship, and obviously I'm biased. I'm Lewes, and we're currently in that relegation battle. So I'd rather it not be this year, but it is, and I think it does make it more exciting. In the Championship, you've got, I think, 4 teams at the top who are all competing to be promoted into the WSL, and then it's similar at the bottom, 3 or 4 teams at the bottom who are all in that relegation battle. So yeah, for any women's football fans, it's really exciting, and I think that will only come as more teams come into the league and as the game grows. So I think the playoffs is a great way to do that in the future.
I mean, there's a competitive imbalance in the men's Premier League, isn't there? I mean, for so long, I mean, I support one of the 3 teams that just got promoted, but for so long, all I've heard is, the bottom 3 are not good enough. the gap between the Premier League and the Championship's too big. None of them are staying up. Thankfully, my team are sort of sticking two fingers up at everyone who said that so far, albeit they dropped into the bottom three over the weekend. So that sort of competitive balance argument doesn't really carry much weight because I'm more of the kind of, well, how can a team improve if they're not allowed into it? You know, I keep on coming back to Luton. It's just who I follow and what I know. But Luton have improved with every game they've played in the Premier League. If you say to Rob Edwards now, are Luton the same team that played Brighton in the first game of the season? He would say absolutely not. They're 100% better. And that would be the case for whoever gets promoted first or second in the Championship. Yet they'll probably need the first 10 games in the WSL to adjust themselves to what they're getting themselves into, going up against regular international footballers and everything else. But you don't just surrender in life, do you? You get to the stage where, oh, this is the levels that we need to be at, and you do everything you can to get as close to those levels. So I don't really buy into the competitive argument of it.
Yeah, definitely. You see, I said a perfect example of that is Bristol City this season. So they were unfortunate they lost against Leicester this weekend, but they are not going down without a fight. Honestly, I'm envious of them because you can see the passion in them, you can see the fight in them, and I think they have one of the highest attendances in the WSL. I think they're like fourth highest, despite being the bottom of the league. So even take the results aside, they are growing the women's game. They are making women's football, so big in Bristol, and it's a club that's close to my heart. So again, like you with Luton, I'm so passionate and I'm there for the fight with them. But yeah, I think even if they come back down to the Championship next year, they have so many youngsters who are playing at international level too. So I think it's only good for the women's game. And even if you end up being a yo-yo team and you go up and you go down, at least you've got something to celebrate every other season, haven't you? So it makes it more exciting. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's it. Ultimately, if you're going to have promotion and relegation, someone is going to be less competitive than everyone else because someone has to finish bottom, Craig. It's just, that's sport, isn't it? And no one wants a close shop where it's just 12 teams in the Women's Super League. That would be the absolute disaster situation. You have to have promotion and relegation. So you've just got to accept that someone is going to be worse than the others, and then hope that once they've tasted being worse than the others, they go back, they regroup, and then when they come back the next time, as Rhian says, if they're a yo-yo club, the next time they're more equipped to be even more competitive than they were. That's just the way that you improve the standards throughout any competition.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with both of you. And knowing Lauren Smith, the head coach at Bristol City, I know how thorough she is, and her attention to detail is excellent, and she's a great coach and a great manager as well. And it certainly won't be through want of trying on her part and with her staff. And I think you also have to look at the money invested by clubs with their women's teams as well. I don't know what Lauren's budget is, but going back to my days with Rhian at Lewes, we played in the year that Liverpool won the league. So obviously you've got Lewes FC, whose men's teams are semi-pro, playing in the Ishman League, and then you've got Liverpool Football Club, one of the top three clubs probably in world football. So obviously the budget's going to be different. I think we had, as I alluded to earlier, we had 2 international players, and I think Liverpool had 8 or 9 at the time. So just by default, these bigger clubs are going to generate and attract bigger players because of training facilities, because of the salary budget, etc. So I think by having a greater number of teams in both leagues, both WSL and FA Women's Championship, that will allow growth from the leagues underneath, from the national leagues north and south, and just make it more competitive. And also, as I said, just make it more of a viable product in so much there's more games that supporters can go to. They can generate that sort of that loyalty to the club and watch games on a more regular basis. Players and coaches are able to get more consistency in their performances because they play more regularly. And that was my biggest frustration, as I said, when I coached in the FA Women's Championship with Lewes. We'd beat the last game of the season. We talked about crowds, and we beat Liverpool in the last game of the season, and we had a sellout then. And but we go into other games and we lose against teams at the bottom of the league simply because we didn't have that consistency, because we weren't playing on a regular basis. But no, I think it's an exciting time for women's football. And as I said, with Newco, I just hope they grasp this opportunity with both hands and look to really, along with the FA, obviously, as the national governing body, look to, maybe restructure and introduce the initiatives that we've spoken about. Maybe more teams in the leagues, more teams being promoted and obviously then relegated, and perhaps the introduction of playoffs as well.
Yeah, I would love to see playoffs in the women's second tier. I really would. Or even if you just did it something like second and third play each other, the winner of that plays second from bottom in the Women's Super League as a promotion relegation, like they do in Scotland, for example. I just think that the more high jeopardy games that you can get in sport would get more attention on it, because they're the games really, the finals that attract the more attention. Just on Craig's point, Rhian, how is it as a player having this season that goes the best part of 9 months, but you play, let's call it, just under half the amount of games that the men's team do? It must be so hard to get into a rhythm. But not only that, it must be so hard to prepare your body for those games. And there's a huge spate of injuries, which we might touch on the next time we come onto the women's game, because we're running out of time on this one. But it must be so hard for you as an athlete to be able to perform at your best so infrequently.
Yeah, I think it's frustrating. And again, I think we talk about the growth and the development of the women's game, and these are the areas that we really have to evolve. Because if you take it back 5-6 years ago, the squads and the professionalism wasn't there. So having 12 teams in the league was ample. Girls were training 1 or 2 nights a week, and they were tuning up on Sunday, and it was very more to do with grassroots. But I think now the speed in which it's professionalized, this is one of the areas that we really have to push, because we have 12 teams in our league, and then we didn't have a great FA Cup run this year, so we were out of the FA Cup before Christmas at Lewes. I think our Conti Cup game, our final Conti Cup game, just got cancelled against Watford just because the pitch wasn't good enough. So we're talking very, very limited games, and again, I think it's just one of the key areas that we can push in order to develop the women's game more. You have the likes of Newcastle as a standout team at the moment in the Northern League that are really offering decent salaries, professionalism, and they rightly so will be playing in the Championship next season. And unless they blow it, it's in their hands at the moment. But even like Nottingham Forest are really pushing. I know girls that have dropped down from the Championship to play in the league below, and they're really enjoying the football. So I think where this wasn't an issue a few years ago, and maybe the professional wasn't in the teams in the league below, now there's no excuse. You have Pompey down in the south that are really pushing, and I think are in a really good position to get promoted as well. And even different teams like Hashtag, which obviously their men's team, I think, are in the Isthmian League too, but they're doing football in a different way, and they're trying to get revenue in a different way, similar to Lewes, but they deserve their place in football and play in those games every week too. So yeah, I think it will only grow the women's game, more exposure, and it'll just make it for a better product.
So if we were to extend the leagues, Craig, are we looking at, I don't know, 2 leagues of 16, for example? Would both divisions have enough strength to carry that?
I think so, Kevin. Yeah, you look at the Southern Premier Division, for example. You've got professional teams there in Portsmouth, Oxford United, Ipswich Town, MK Dons, Plymouth Argyle, Cheltenham Town. But that's probably doing an injustice to the teams that are up there, like Rhian has mentioned. Like Hashtag United, Rugby Borough is another one. You've got Cardiff Ladies as well. So there are there's strong football league clubs with all that foundation and all that potential resource, and of course probably none more so than Newcastle United in the Women's Northern League. Then you've got Nottingham Forest, Burnley, Derby County, Wolverhampton Wanderers, Stoke City, West Brom, not to mention again Liverpool Feds, which has always been a traditional strong women's team. So yeah, I think the future is really, really bright. I think by extending the leagues, I think you might see football league clubs maybe invest more money in the women's teams if they thought there was the opportunity for to play in the FA Women's Championship, and more so then promotion into the WSL with more promotion if you included maybe a second team to be promoted from the FA Women's Championship. So yeah, I think it's all positive, and I think there is strength in depth. I've got a personal friend who's the physio, Tony Dunn, at Newcastle Women, and I follow him obviously on Facebook and the likes. And as Rhian said, they've got really strong foundations there, and I'm sure if they came up, and I think they will, given their lead of 9 points at this stage, then I'm sure they'll be a force to be reckoned with in the FA Women's Championship, as Southampton have been proven to be this season.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just finishing on the Championship then, Rhian, obviously you mentioned that you're in the relegation battle at the moment, but are you confident that you might be able to pull yourself out of it and stay up in that Championship? I noticed that the team above you are Watford, and obviously as a Luton fan, I'd be more than happy if you finished above them, that's for sure. But can you keep yourselves up this season down at Lewes?
Yeah, I really hope so. And again, I'm biased. I'm the captain. I've been here for 5 years, but it's such a special club, and I know we've got more to offer. So we're going to fight until the very end. We've got some amazing supporters down there that seem to celebrate even if we lose 5-6-0. So that they're really good. And I think it's going to be close. We've still got 7 games left. We've got Blackburn, a midweek game that's been cancelled, and the last game of the season, London City Lionesses. So I hope it doesn't go down to that game. But we're performing really well. If you look at the performances and you look at the results, we're taking Sunderland we're winning 3-2 with 2 minutes to go. So it's all about game management, and I'm sure we'll have a thorough review of that as we go back into training. It's exciting. If I wasn't the captain of Lewes, my eyes would be glued to the screen, as I said, close at the top and the bottom. But yeah, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we'll stay up and we'll be part of that new code that Craig talked about next season, because I think women's football it's such a special place, and it's so inclusive, and I think Lewes should be a part of that for all the messages they do off the pitch as well as on the.
No, I couldn't agree more. It's Lewes is a special football club, and they've been advocates of equality, for quite some time now, and it doesn't just it's not just about the quality of the budget or anything like that. It is true equality, and I think they've been an advocate for this worldwide, and I know they're recognised for this worldwide, and I wish Rhian and everybody at Lewes Football Club the very best for the rest of the season, and I'm sure they can avoid the drop, and the way they've been performing of late, just missing out on actual results, but the performances have been vastly improved, and I wish Scott Booth and everybody there that every success from now to the end of the season, and I hope they can avoid the drop, none more so than Maggie and Lynn, of course.
Yeah, all the best with that, Rhian. We hope that come the end of the season, Lewes are celebrating staying up, and we hope that the women's game as a whole actually continues to thrive, not just under the new company that's going to come in, but also there's an independent regulator coming into the men's game who should have a duty to bring the men's teams and the women's teams an awful lot closer together, both in terms of funding and promotion. So yeah, it's an exciting time for the women's game off the back of the Lionesses, and it's doing great stuff, but there's still so much work that can be done. And we hope that we've reflected on some of those during this podcast. And I'm sure later in the season, when Rhian has another quiet moment, that we can get her back on and we can reflect on a few more of the issues that there are sort of in the underneath of the women's game. I'd love that, Rhian, if you wouldn't mind doing that with us.
Yeah, definitely. As I said, thank you so much for having me on. And I think it's things like this, like the director's box, just really advocating and giving a platform for our voices to be listened to, that is really going to help grow the women's game. So I can't thank you both enough.
It's an absolute pleasure. And yeah, as I say, all the best. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining me, Craig. Your insight's been fantastic again.
Could I just say good luck to a good friend of mine, John Gray, who has taken on the mantle of interim manager, head coach of the Wales women's national team. I think his first game is against the Republic of Ireland this weekend. So good luck, John, and James Rowbury and all of his coaching staff. And obviously being a proud Welshman, as is Rhian, a proud Welsh woman, I'm sure we both be wishing them all the very best against the Republic of Ireland this weekend.
If you are going to a football match this weekend, do enjoy it. If you're not going to a football match, tune into ITV on Friday night and watch that Lionesses game, or any of the international games actually that are on. You will definitely enjoy the product that is served up, or even next weekend, go back to the Women's Super League and attend a game. everything helps and grow that women's game. So that's it for this episode of the podcast. Once again, thank you so much to Rhian for giving up your time. We really do appreciate that. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the women's game from top to second tier and the international level. And as I say, we will promote further issues with the women's game much later on in the season when we can get Rhian back. So until next week, where we will return to the men's game and probably reflect on the League Cup final. Until then, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.